A warm good morning to one and all present here. Respected sir and all others. Myself, Arsha Hari, Temple scholar and coordinator of today's session, welcomes you all to have a fruitful time. Today we are moving on to the fourth session of net coaching organized by Commerce Club, Department of Commerce, University of Kerala. Today we will be having the continuation of our first section conducted on August 7th, income tax and corporate tax planning. And for this, today we have with us Professor and Head, Department of Commerce and Dean Faculty of Commerce, Professor Dr. Gabriel Simon Tettel, sir. We have the recorded class of our first session on our YouTube channel, so please do subscribe our channel for more updates. Link to the YouTube channel will be posted in the chat box. Now, I'd like our Professor Dr. Gabriel Simon Tettel, sir, to take over the session. Sir, please, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Asha. Very good morning to one and all. Am I audible? You can hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, Independence Day greetings to all of you. Happy Independence Day and the anniversary of Independence Day to all. Sorry if I was a bit late because we had some other work in between. Now I'm starting with the presentation in continuation of what we discussed in the last class. So we are beginning with that, and I'll start off directly with the presentation because we are running short of time. So last class we were looking at the basic concepts, including assessment year, previous year, SSC, person, minimum average rate of tax, average rate of tax, then residential status, incidence of tax based on residential status, application of income, so on and so forth. So now we are starting off with the heads of income. So first year, basically, we have already seen that we have 5 heads of income. We have already seen the concept of gross total income, and we have also seen how there is a basic association between heads of income, deductions which are head specific, and deductions which are general. So today we are going further with this, with each head. So first head that we are looking into is salary. Okay. So from this we will quickly move on into the other heads. Okay, sorry. Okay. So in salary, a couple of things which are important as far as your objective question is concerned. Salary income is that which is due from employer. So the first test is whether there is an employer-employee relationship. There could be different incomes which come in the name of salary, but it might not be through an employer-employee relationship. So there are some examples on that which have come in previous question papers. One is what you get from the partner's salary. The partner's salary is part of profits and gains from business and profession. It will not come under the head salary because partner is not an employee of the firm. So employer-employee relationship does not exist. So also maybe a salary which is given for under the name salary, but it will be for some service which does not come under employer-employee relationship. So 2 important points that are important there is you need to have employer-employee relationship, and income which comes to an employee which is not from the employer or which is not from that relationship will not come under the head salary. So for example, a teacher who is employed, say I'm employed with the university. So what I get from the university will be salary. But suppose I'm engaged by some other agency for some other work, maybe examination work, then that does not come under the head salary. It will come under the head income from other sources. So also you need to have a distinction between salary income and professional income. So what we actually get from salary and what the same thing can also become professional income. It is based on how that service is rendered. Say, for example, a doctor can become an employee of a hospital. A medical practitioner can become an employee of a hospital. A medical practitioner can also do professional practice and get income in a professional way. So what he gets as when he is acting as a professional will be taxed under the head profits and gains from business and profession, and it will not be taxed under the head salary income. Same with a lawyer can be a practicing lawyer, which will be professional income. A lawyer can also be employed in a particular firm, in which what he gets from employer-employee relationship will be in the form of a salary income. So also a chartered accountant can be appointed as a finance manager. So now what he gets when he's a finance manager of a firm is salary. A chartered accountant can do independent practice, but when he's doing independent practice, what he gets is professional income. So use of the two terms are very, very important. So also remember, salary includes all the sum which you are getting from your employer, including arrears and advance of salary. So the key important point, before this, the key important point that you need to remember here is it is the salary which is due, which is the subject matter of tasks. Very important for your net examinations. So you have salary received and you have salary due, and you have accrual. So as we already saw, we are taking accrual basis. But then again, when you're saying salary due, normally received and due is very clear. But due and accrual, there is a slight difference between that. Although when you're saying due is the same amount that is accrued, but there's a slight difference between that when it comes to salary. So for your net purpose, keep in mind that it is salary due. And when you're saying salary due and the salary accrued, there's a slight difference. The difference is this. Suppose you say salary that has accrued to you in a particular year. From that, there could be certain legal or other compulsions which, by virtue of which there's some amount which is set aside. It is not set aside by you, in which case it is application of the salary. So you are not setting aside an amount on your own, but because of some legal compulsion or because of some legal issues, some amount of your salary on the accrual basis itself has to be set aside for some other purpose. In that case, your salary due will be less. I'll just give that through an example. Say, for example, in the year, maybe in one previous year, let us take, for example, 2010-11, you get some salary. Say it is 8 lakh rupees. And in the year 2019-20, or let us take the previous year, in the year 2020-21, you get 25 lakh rupees as salary. So once again, I'm repeating the example. In the year 2009-10, you got a salary of rupees 8 lakhs. And that year is gone, you pay tax, return is filed, and then many years have passed after that. And again, in the year 2020-21, you're getting a salary of total annual salary of 25 lakhs, taxable salary of 25 lakhs. Now, in the year 2021, government or maybe your employer finds that the salary that is paid to you in the year 2009-10, that 8 lakhs, had 1 lakh rupees, which was an amount which came to you by mistake or error, and which should not have been given to you.
Yeah. So sorry to interrupt, sir. The screen is not visible.
Screen is not visible. Okay, I'll share again. Is it visible now?
No, sir.
Not visible. Okay. Is it visible now?
There is an accessible.
Okay, so this is what we were trying to talk about, the distinction between salary and professional income, and then I came to employer-employee relationship. And what was the last thing that I was discussing about due and arrear. When we talk about due, normally due and accrual, not due and arrear, due and accrual is the same. So we normally, what we saw when we discussed in the last class, what we get as an income and what is due to us as an income are two figures. What I get as income from house property, or what I get as salary, or what I get as capital gains, and what is due to me are two things. And we saw this in terms of accounting concepts. We also we call it as cash concept and accrual concept. So accrual concept is what is due. Say, for example, in your accounting, you saw when we were discussing, when you are in right from your +2 days, suppose you get rent for 2 months. Rent is 1,000 rupees per month. So 2 months, it is 2,000 rupees. In your accounting, what do you do in the profit and loss account? You say rent received 2,000 and outstanding rent for the remaining period, you add the 10 months and make it 12,000 rupees. Now, what have we done through this? We have brought the amount from the received to the receivable. And this is what we call accrual concept. So similarly, if you receive 24 months or 36 months rent together, you will put the rent received and deduct that which is received in advance, prepaid, and then you make it the amount which is due for 1 year. So in this concept of accounting, what I was trying to say, what are we doing? We are bringing through adjusting entries or through adjustments, we are bringing the amount from the received to the receivable. Same thing in taxation, we are supposed to go by the receivable figures. So what I'm trying to tell you now, when it comes to salary, the receivable figure itself, which is the due figure, might be slightly different from the accrual. That is what I was trying to explain. Now, the difference comes when the amount that you get has got certain adjustments which are compulsions for you to make that adjustments. Then the accrued amount and the due amount also, there is a slight difference. So what you have to keep in mind when you're talking about your net examination is to remember that it is the due salary which is taxable. Normally we say cash or accrual basis, but there is a slight difference between accrual and due. That is why we are saying you take the salary due, that is taxable. Now, I was trying to give an example between the difference between due and accrual. An example where one person gets a salary in the year 2009-10, one previous year which was past 10 years back. He gets 8 lakh rupees. And in 2021, he gets 25 lakh rupees for the current previous year. Now, in the year 2021, the employer realizes that the amount paid 10 years back in 2009-10, 8 lakh rupees, had 1 lakh rupees, which was paid by mistake. So that realization comes 10 years later in 2021. Now they are saying the amount which was paid to you 10 years back is 1 lakh rupees was paid in mistake. So now we are deducting this. So this was not a choice of the employee. It was a compulsory deduction which was made by the employer. So now what happens? In the year 2021, the income that has been accrued was 25 lakh rupees. But the income due is not 25 lakh rupees because 1 lakh rupees which was paid by mistake 10 years back is now deducted. So the income that is due, salary that is due under the head salary, the income that is coming out is 24 lakh rupees and not 25 lakh rupees. So what I'm trying to say here is normally accrued, your due income can have some adjustments which are going because of certain compulsory payments. So what is due to you is after. And what you take is always salary due. And keep this amount, it is not what you actually get. What you get, say for example, if I am an employee, I take only 2 months salary. My salary per month is 2 lakh rupees. 2 months salary, I take 4 lakh rupees. Rest of the 10 months, I'm saying I don't want salary. So I'm getting only 4 lakh rupees salary when I'm entitled to get 24 lakh rupees salary. Now I should pay my income tax on 24 lakh rupees, which is due, and not on the amount of rupees 4 lakhs which I get. The only exception to this is if I give the salary or surrender the salary voluntarily to the government, then I need pay only on because the government will take this 20 lakhs from me and 4 lakhs is what I get. Then the salary due will be considered to be 4 lakhs. But in all other cases, even if you don't take salary for one single day, and work for all the 365 days, salary due is the amount which you are entitled to get for the 365 days. So that's why we are saying it is salary due which is taxable, and not the salary which you get that is taxable. Again, one more concept which you need to keep in mind. You might have heard in the different, this is again once asked question for your net examination. Is there something like tax-free salary? We hear about in newspaper the tax-free salary is 20 lakh rupees or tax-free salary is 15 lakh rupees. Now, as far as income tax purpose is concerned, there is nothing like tax-free salary. Now, tax-free salary only means that the employer will pay the tax. So suppose your total tax, total salary, you're saying tax-free salary is 15 lakhs and the employer is paying 3 lakh rupees as tax for you. Now, as far as your income is concerned, it is the gross amount which is taxable. That means what you get plus the tax on that. So 18 lakhs will be taxable. So this is one more thing which is important. And the last part that we were trying to look here is always in salary, there is something called arrears and something called advance. So in one, now we said salary due is taxable and not received is taxable. But then there could be a situation when you receive more than what is due. Now, say for instance, whenever a salary revision takes place, say for instance, when the UGC salary revision came in 2015-16, we get this, we won't get the amount in 2015, we start getting it maybe in 2021 or maybe 1920. So we get arrears for the period which is in the past, 16-17, 17-18, 18-19, we might get as arrears. Now, we never knew that the salary for 16-17 would include this much amount, because the amount due at that time was not known. And now we get the lump sum together in a future period. So when there is arrears or when there is advance, then it is the amount including arrears and advance which becomes taxable. So in that year, you will get a higher amount. And only thing is, under section 89, you can claim relief from tax for the amount of the years which are not in that period, which comes into that year. Say, for example, in the year 2021, if you get that year's salary plus arrears for 15, 16, 16, 17, 17, 18, then there are arrears of salary included in this, which is giving you a chance to claim relief under section 89. So that is where you have to claim a relief for that. Now, what is important there? We said it is salary due that is taxable. Now, if there is salary more than what is due, if you're getting an amount, receiving an amount which is higher than what is actually due, then the salary due or received, if you get the received amount earlier, then that will become taxable. So that means if there is arrears or advance, then the received amount, even if it is more because of taking previous years or because of taking subsequent years salary including in your tax liability, then that becomes taxable. So remember, it is salary due that is taxable. It should come from an employer-employee relationship and not from any other. You can name it as salary, but it will come under some other head if it is not through employer-employee relationship. And it is due amount that becomes salary that becomes taxable. But if you receive a higher amount than due because of arrears or advance, then that will become taxable. So these are the basic concepts which are important as far as the introductory part of salary is concerned. Now, in our current session, we cannot go by all allowances and all perquisites and all valuations. So I'm just talking about certain things which are important from the examination perspective. Now, when I'm putting this, keep in mind that this is not an exhaustive list. These are certain examples based on past questions. The rest of the allowances you must look into. So these are certain examples of fully taxable allowances: dearness allowance, city compensatory allowance, your tiffin allowance, servant allowance, fixed medical allowance, and all that. So these are some examples where they're fully taxable. Now, but more important for you is those which are partially taxable allowances. And of that, the most important is house rent allowance. Now, when you say partially taxable, actually what we mean is one part of it is taxable and one part of it is exempt. So when it comes to partially taxable allowances, what is more important for your examination perspective is what part is exempt or what part is taxable. It can be in either way. The question can come to you as this much is received. It can either be asked as MCQ, what is taxable, or what is exempt. So this much is taxable, then what is exempt? So in both cases, you should know what is exempt. If you know what is exempt, total amount minus exempt is taxable. So in that case, we need to find out what is exempt. I've just given some examples. Again, there are a large number of partially taxable allowances, including hill area allowance, risk allowance, distress allowance. So many allowances are there, which will be roughly coming to maybe around 30 plus allowances. So I'm only which we cannot discuss all together here. The most important allowance, one is house rent allowance. Now the exemption for house rent allowance comes in this form. It will be 40% of the salary if the accommodation is located in cities other than Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, and Kolkata. If it is in the 4 metro cities, it's 50%. That's why I said 40/50. That means the first amount is 40% of the salary if the accommodation is located in cities other than the metros of Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata. And it is 50 if it is in Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, and Kolkata. So that's the first amount. Second amount is excess of the rent that you have paid over 10% of the salary. Remember, house rent allowance can be claimed as a deduction only when you are staying in rented house. So excess of rent paid over 10% of the salary, and you take the actual HRA. So least of this will be exempted. The first amount is 50% of the salary if you are in Delhi, Mumbai, Calcutta, or in Chennai, or 40% in other cities. Second amount is excess of the rent that you pay over 10% of the salary. And the third amount is the actual HRA that you get. So you compute the 3 figures and you take the lowest, that will be exempted. Now, one thing again for your past examination, which has come as a question over there. Now, the question was in this form. Somebody is paying rent, which is less than 10% of the person's salary. That means the employee, the given example says that the employee is taking a house on rent. He is paying rent on that, but the rent paid is less than 10% of the salary. That means there is, or in other words, it simply implies that there is no excess of rent over 10% of the salary. So if there is no excess of rent paid over 10% of the salary, from the 3 figures given here, the second figure will become 0. And when the second figure becomes 0, obviously least will be 0. And they was asking what is the part that is exempted. And the answer is quite obvious. Exemption will be 0. Or when I'm saying it is 0, the other way of saying it is HRA will be fully taxable. Now, that means you can claim, from this it's quite evident that you can claim an exemption only if you pay rent above 10% of the salary. If you're paying less than that, then the second amount will become 0. So if you pay excess of rent over 10% of the salary, then you compare these 3 amounts, and whichever is the least, that will be exempted. Now, if you get something as education allowance, then the exemption is this. You can claim exemption at the rate of 100 rupees per child per month up to a maximum of 2 children. So 100 per child per month, 2 children is educational allowance exemption. You will be given amount and you will be asked what is the exemption. The case might be with 3 children, 4 children. It can be for 10 months, allowance given for 10 months, 9 months, 12 months. So month can vary, children can vary, amount given can vary. And you will be asked what is the exemption. So you have to compute based on this principle, 100 rupees per child per month up to 2 children. So same 100 rupees is given for more than 2 children, you have to restrict it to 2 children. If the amount is higher than 100, you have to restrict it to 100 and based on the number of months. Now, along with this, if there is hostel allowance, you can get an exemption of an additional, again, 300 rupees per child per month, subject to a maximum of 2 children. Now, there are a number of other allowances which are meant for specific purposes. Like for defense persons and for the police person, there is uniform allowance. There is some traveling allowance for certain kind of people who have to travel for specific tasks. There are some allowances like a daily allowance which are meant to meet certain exigencies when some people work outstation. Now, for all specific allowances or for all allowances that are meant for specific purpose, the amount is exempted to the extent to which it is used for that purpose. That means when allowances are given for certain specific purposes based on the nature of the job, So I can't give all the nature of the job. Keeping your MCQ in mind, maybe they'll be giving you a case of a policeman or a case of a defense person or something like a postman. These are all people who have special purpose allowance because they work outstation, they have to travel, they have to be in uniform, or they have to engage in certain specific operations. And for discharging those operations, they have been given some allowances. Now, when such allowances are given, then in that case, what is taxable is only that part of the allowance which they do not spend for the purpose for which it is given. Say, for example, policemen are given uniform allowance, and say the uniform allowance is, say, 25,000 rupees in a year, and they spend only 20,000 on the uniform, then 5,000 will become taxable. If they spend 25,000 or more than that, it is fully exempted. Or some outstation allowance is given for people who work outstation for something, and they don't spend that amount. So this is taxable to the extent to which they don't spend it. That means if they spend it fully for that purpose, then there is no taxability in that. So these are partially taxable allowance. Fully exempted allowance generally are allowances which are given by the government of India for Indian citizens who work outside on specific tasks assigned to them, like allowance for commissioners who work abroad, different deputy commissioners and IFS officers who work abroad. And in India, it is for allowances which are given to High Court judges, Supreme Court judges. These are all fully exempted allowances. So I just gave some prominent examples which normally come for your NET examinations, and there are a number of cases which fully we cannot actually cover based on the limitations of time that we have. Now, perquisites, again, as I said, there are a large perquisites and allowances. Allowances, you are getting a cash benefit for a particular purpose. Perquisite, it is in kind. So you get house rent allowance, which is actually meant to meet the expenses on the rent that you pay when you're in a rented house. But the employer, instead of giving you house rent allowance, they can give you a rent-free house. That house can be owned by the employer, or it can be taken on rent and given to you. But the employer is not giving you a allowance, the employer is giving you the house. So it becomes a perquisite. The employer can give you a allowance for car, and you take the car and you will take that amount which is given by the employer. That's a car allowance. Now, instead of doing that, the employer can give you a car in kind. That becomes a perquisite. The education allowance, which means the employer is giving you an amount for the education of your children or for the education of the employee. So it's an allowance. Instead of doing that, the employer can say that, okay, we'll run a school, or you do your education, children's education on school, and we'll reimburse that. So it's a perquisite. Medical allowance, you get some cash for treatment. And medical allowance can also be a perquisite when you're saying that we'll give you treatment facility in a hospital. So it's medical treatment. So what I'm trying to tell you is, when it is in the cash form, it becomes an allowance. And when it is in a kind form, it becomes a perquisite. So these are some perquisites, which, again, there are a number of other perquisites like servant, gas, electricity, water, movable assets, education, other loans. Education I've already covered, other loans. So number of perquisites. So I've just taken some most common perquisites which are important for your examination perspective, out of which the most common perquisite that is coming up is rent-free. It is rent-free. There's a mistake over there. I'll just correct that right now, because it is rent-free accommodation. It is written as rent-free education. Rent-free accommodation. Okay. So it's rent-free accommodation. Now, rent-free accommodation, how do you value this? This, again, rent-free accommodation can be in two forms. It can be in the form of owned house. Employer has a house, employee is giving it for the benefit of the employees. And it can be a house which is rented by the employer and given to the employee. Now, in the first case, it's based on, the value is based on the population of the city. I have not given that here because we cannot cover the whole thing. If the population is exceeding 25 lakhs, that means population of the place where the house is located. If the population of that city is exceeding 25 lakhs, then it is 15% of the employee's salary. The value of the perquisite is 15% of the employee's salary. If the population is exceeding 10 lakhs but does not exceed 25 lakhs, then it is 10% of the salary. And where it is below 10 lakhs, it is 7.5% of the salary. So the three percentages that you have to remember is 15%, 10%, and 7.5%. And the three population slabs are: highest slab is above 25 lakh, between 10 lakh and 25 lakh, and below 10 lakh. If it is below 10 lakh, 7.5, between 10 and 25, it becomes 10%, and above 25 lakhs, it becomes 15%. So this is when the house is actually owned by the employer. Now, if the employer takes it on rent and gives it, leases it out to the employee, in that case, it will be 15% of the employee's salary, or lease rental, whichever is less. So this is for rent-free accommodation. I'm just giving you the clues. The rest of it you can quickly look into. So the objective type question can be in this form. Either they will say that the employee is given a house by the employer. It might be a house which is leased or owned. If it is owned, you have to look at the population. Population details will be given in the question. And according to the population, you have to evaluate. If it is leased, then if it is rented and then given to the employee, then it is 15% of the salary, or lease rental, whichever is lower. Now, we go by this. Now, the car again can be for both official. If the car is totally for official use, then the actuals will become taxable. If it is totally for official use, then there is no taxable value, because there is no benefit that the employee gets. If it is totally for private use, then again the entire actual amount on running maintenance will become taxable. So in these two cases, there is no problem. If it is totally for official use, then we have to actually go by no taxability, because no private benefit is gained by the employer. That means the employee is getting a car, he is using it only for the official use, nothing is taxable. He is using it for the private use alone, then all expenses, actuals, all expenses on running, maintenance becomes taxable. Now the problem comes when it is used for both official and private use. Then in that case, its taxability is based on 1,800 per month or 2,400 per month, based on the cubic capacity of the vehicle. That means if it is up to 1.6 liters cubic capacity of the car, it is 1,800 per month, and if it is above that, it is 2,400 per month. Now, if this car again this is when the car is owned by the employer. If the car is not owned by the employer, that means the employee is owning the car, employee is owning the car, but all expenses are met by the employer. Then in that case, this respective figures, 1,800 will become 600 and 2,400 will become 900 per month. So these things you can quickly refer into. And in all these cases where a car, along with the car, a driver is given, the driver's salary up to 900 rupees per month will be the value of that perquisite. Education reimbursement, yet another perquisite which is important. There you can have education, suppose it can be in different forms. That means education is happening in some institution for the children of the employee or the employees themselves, and all expenses relating to that are reimbursed by the employer. Then the actual expenses will become taxable. That means the employees' children, they are getting educated in some institution which is not owned by the employer, but the employer is paying the actual fees. So whatever be the fees, that fees paid will become taxable. Now, that means the reimbursement becomes taxable. That's what I've just put it in minimum words. Whatever is reimbursed, it becomes taxable. But if the same education is an own facility, what do you mean by own facility? Own facility means the employer is owning the educational institution. It can be directly owned or indirectly owned. Now, this is something which you have to understand, because of late, we are moving into a situation where many public sector undertakings and employers, they don't directly run in educational institutions, but they have either in their campus or in the vicinity of the campus, the employer will have an educational institution which will be run by an agency which is outsourced, but it is run for the employer. So we are calling it own facility. So own facility generally means employer's own school or employer's attributed school. So suppose education is happening in that institution, then the taxability is coming only when the amount of education expense on one child exceeds rupees 1,000. Or in other words, this is again important for your MCQ. Once again, I'm repeating that when education is happening in an outside education institution, not owned by the employer, then whatever reimbursement takes place, it's fully taxable. If it is in the own facility, that means the school or the institution is owned by the employer, then in that case, if you spend up to rupees 1,000 per month, 1,000 per month on a child, or as education expenses, that is exempted. If you spend more than 1,000, if your reimbursement is more than 1,000 per month, then it becomes taxable to the extent of the cost of similar education done in a similar school. Once again, I'm repeating that example. Suppose I take an employer A. Employer A is running their own school, and it is giving the facility of education for children of the employees in that school. And let us take two cases. The amount that the employer spends per child for the children of the employees is up to 1,000. That is 800, 900 or 950, but it is just up to 1,000. Then nothing is taxable. Up to 1,000 is exempted. But suppose they spend per child, they are saying we are spending 1,500 rupees per child. What is what the employer says? Then what is taxable will be the cost of such an education in a similar institution. So, or in other words, what you have to keep in mind is up to 1,000 spent in own facility for the education of children is tax exempted. But it should be in own facility. This own facility also includes government educational institutions and institutions which are run by semi-government institutions, semi-government organizations that are also considered along with own facility. So there, if you're doing an own facility, up to 1,000 rupees per month is exempted. Otherwise, it's taxable. Medical treatment, again, the same thing. If you do the medical treatment in own facility, when I'm saying own facility, what I mean is it is done by the employer's own facility. Or you can do it in government facility, that means government hospital or hospital run by semi-government institutions. Then it is exempted. But if you are doing the medical treatment in a private clinic or a private hospital, and then reimbursing that amount, it becomes taxable. So in the case of education and in the case of medical treatment, if it is provided for the employees in the own facility, it is exempted. But the difference is for medical treatment, it is exempted without limit. You can spend any amount if it is in own facility. But in education institution, there is a limit, 1,000 rupees per month. Up to that, it is exempted. So these are some common perquisites which you should value. In the case of servants, like all your domestic servants, watchman, gardener, cook and all, the actual amount that you pay is taxable. But if a rent-free accommodation is given, and along with that there is a gardener, then there is no separate valuation for servant. But in all other cases, if there a servant is also provided, the actual amount that you pay to such servants will become the value of the perquisite. Similarly, for rent-free accommodation, suppose the rent-free accommodation is furnished. You're giving, now what we have talked about is just rent-free accommodation, which is unfurnished. But if you are saying that you're giving it as a furnished accommodation, then you value it as it is an unfurnished accommodation. And to that, you will add 10% of the cost of furniture given. That means based on the population, if it is about 25 lakh, as I said earlier, you take 15% of the salary. Between 10, you take 10%. So you value it in that form. And to this value, you have to add 10% of the cost of furniture that is given. So cost of furniture will be given in the questions. You have to add 10% of the cost of furniture. If it is owned furniture, if it is leased furniture, the lease rental must be added. And remember in this, for your examination purpose, again, furniture does not mean just chair, table, cot and almara and all. Furniture also includes equipment over here. Air conditioners, refrigerators, televisions. This is also coming under the head furniture. So this is how you have to generally value perquisites. Now, another important thing, as we said, now when you value all the allowances, you take your basic pay, you take all your allowances which are taxable. If there are exemptions, you remove the exemptions and take the remaining part. Then you also value all your perquisites like rent-free accommodation, car, and all those things. Now you have your gross salary. Now from the gross salary, under section 16, you have 3 deductions, and it is an exhaustive list. Keep in mind, this is once a question. Are the deductions exhaustive, or can it include certain things which are not mentioned in that? We saw this in the initial concepts in the last class. When you say that a deduction list is exhaustive, it means that those deductions which are mentioned there alone can be deducted and nothing else. So when you're saying deductions under salary, the deductions are spelled out under section 16. And in that section, there are only 3 deductions: standard deduction, entertainment allowance, and professional tax. And of these 3 deductions, entertainment allowance is available only for government employees. That means for non-government employees, there are only 2 deductions: standard deduction and professional tax. Now, again, aligning to the concept of deductions, we saw that the deductions actually are given under a concept that there are certain expenses which have to be incurred in order to earn a particular income. So those expenses which are very closely integrated or linked to the income, they have to be given as deductions. This is the concept. Say, for example, if you want to do business in a rented building, you'll have to pay rent. So it's an expense which is part of the business income. And in your profit and loss account, you debit rent. If you have to do business by taking loan, you'll have to pay interest. So the interest that you pay on the loan for the business can be deducted from business income. So like that, the expenses which are integral to earning an income can be deducted from that income. So suppose I am saying I am a teacher. I have to spend some amount on buying books to prepare for my teaching. Now I am saying that the books that I purchase, the expenses that I've incurred on purchasing books are integral to my income. So can I deduct that from salary? That is where the Income Tax Act says for some heads of income, there is no additional expenses which you can adjust. All other expenses, they are giving only one heading, they're calling it standard deduction. So up to that you can put, and that is claimed irrespective of what you spend. Even if you have got no expenses on salary income, even then you can claim standard deduction up to 50,000. And even if you have expenses up to 2 lakh or 3 lakh, even then standard deduction is always 50,000. So irrespective of what, that is why what is important here in your MCQ is understand that standard deduction has got nothing to do with the actuals. It is just a block sum which you can claim for all expenses. So this is part of tax rationalization. Understand that concept. That's why I'm relating this. Because suppose I am saying that you can claim expenses that are associated with the income. Suppose I'm putting it in that sense. Then people will claim different expenses, and it's very difficult to rationalize it across the country. Employees in IT will have one set of expenses, teaching will have another set of expenses, daily wages will have another set of expenses. And all these expenses will be very diverse, very varied, and very complex. So it will be very difficult to adjust that. That is why, as part of rationalization, the income tax department says, we don't want to know what are your expenses for earning salary income. For all your expenses, collectively, we will give a standard deduction. And you will not give any document for that. And we are not asking for the actuals. You can claim up to a specified amount. And that is what is called standard deduction. The same thing you will see when it comes to income from house property. Earlier, ground rent. We have to pay ground rent to get building. So you can deduct that. Annual charge. When I was a student, it was like that. Those who have studied in 80s, 85, the number of items which can be deducted from house property income. Then it became very difficult to understand that. So now even in house property, you have only one standard deduction. So keep in mind these two concepts. Number one, the list of deductions under both salary income as well as house property income is exhaustive. That means there are only 2-3 items. What are those? Exhaustive means the list is complete. You cannot claim any deduction other than what is mentioned over there. Now in salary, only 3 deductions are mentioned: standard deduction, entertainment allowance, professional tax. Other than that, whatever come as examples in your MCQ, I spend this much to earn that income, I spend that much, nothing can be allowed. Deductions, only these 3 things can be allowed: standard deduction, entertainment allowance, and professional tax. And that too, standard deduction can be allowed only for those who are government employees. So for others, it's only 2. And remember, the current amount, standard deduction is applicable for the year 2021, financial year 20, or your previous year 2021. It is up to rupees 50,000. Assessment year 2021. Before that, 2019-20, it is 40,000 rupees. And from 2006-7 to 2018-19, there was no standard deduction. Before that, there was standard deduction. So 80s, 90s, up to 2005-6, there was standard deduction. 6-7 onwards, up to 2018-19. So approximately around up to say 2006-7 to 18-19, 12 to 14 years, there was no standard deduction. Now again, we have standard deduction, and the current amount is 50,000. So the questions can be twisted in an analytical perspective, saying that to earn salary, somebody spent only 10,000 rupees. How much can be deducted as standard deduction? Or somebody spent 80,000 rupees. How much can be deducted as standard deduction? If the assessment year is 2021, then 2021 and subsequently what has happened, that also I'm telling you, in 21-22, two rates of taxes have come to being. And there is a choice. In the last budget, the finance minister gave two choices to a choice to the employees to go by the old rate of tax or the new rate of tax. If they choose to go by the new rate of tax, this deduction is not available. But if they go by the old rate of tax, this deduction is available. In 2021, the rate is 50,000. So this is the latest amount, and it has got nothing to do with the actuals. Even if your expense is 10,000, you can take 50,000. Even if it is 80,000, it will be only 50,000. And if they are asking the year prior to that, 1920, the amount is 40,000. And there was a period for which there was no standard deduction. That was between 2006-7 to 2018-19. So that is about standard deduction. And this standard deduction should cover all expenses that you want to claim for earning salary. So the expense can be higher, expense can be lower, expense can be zero, but you can claim the fixed amount. That is the concept of standard deduction. Entertainment allowance, as I said, it's for government employees. And the deduction that you can claim is 5,000, least of the following: 5,000 rupees, 1/5 of salary, or actual entertainment allowance, whichever is lower. Okay, so it can be least of this: 5,000 rupees, 1/5 of salary, or 20% of the salary, or actual amount, whichever is you can claim as deduction. But that's only for government employees. And professional tax is the amount which somebody pays to the local authority. So those employees who are working in the corporation must pay something to the corporation. Those who are in municipality can have to pay to the municipal corporation. And those who are in panchayat must pay to the panchayats. So that is what is called as professional tax. That amount is deductible based on the actuals that you pay. And also keep in mind, the maximum that the income tax department allows a local authority to claim as professional tax is 2,500. But what is important here is only the actual amount paid by the employee in one particular year in the previous year will be adjusted here. So the limits here: standard deduction 50,000, entertainment allowance 1/5 of salary, 5,000, or actual amount whichever is least, and professional tax, the actual amount paid. So this is what can be adjusted over there. Now in this, one more thing which is asked, I'm coming to that also, is the provident fund. We have three types of provident fund. One which is applicable to government employees, which we call statutory provident fund. The other, which comes to all places of work where there are 20 plus employees, which come under the Provident Fund Act. That means which organizations which come under the Provident Fund Act 1952. That is called recognized provident fund. And the third one is unrecognized provident fund. There are some questions which are important. Now, as far as the statutory provident fund is concerned, in this, all the three provident funds, employees' contribution is taxable. But there is no need of computing a separate value for that, because the payment is made out of salary. Whatever I am contributing to my statutory provident fund, or if it is a recognized provident fund, or if it is an unrecognized provident fund, the employee contributes from the employee's salary. So once it's from your salary is becoming taxable in the gross amount, so that you need not compute that amount separately. Say, for example, if my monthly salary is 25,000 and I am paying 2,000 rupees into provident fund, my 25,000 is already becoming taxable. So this 2,000 I need not show separately. So employee's contribution is taxable. Now, in addition to the employee's contribution, if the employer makes a contribution to the employee's fund, so statutory contribution, employer is making a contribution to the employees fund, then in that case, if it is a statutory provident fund, the amount is not taxable. And the interest that you get is also not taxable. So in statutory provident fund, employer's contribution and interest is not taxable. In a recognized provident fund, employer's contribution is not taxable if it is up to 12% of the employee's salary. And again, interest is also exempted up to 9.5%. So once again, statutory, employer's contribution, that the nutshell what you have to remember, statutory, employer's contribution and interest is exempted. Recognized, employer's contribution up to 12% of employee's salary and interest up to 9.5% is exempted. In unrecognized provident fund, there is no year-on-year taxation. It is taxed only in the lump sum when you get it at the time of retirement, and employer's contribution and interest thereon becomes taxable, but on a lump sum basis. So between the first two and the last, the difference is in recognized provident fund, there is year-on-year taxation, whereas in unrecognized, it is a lump sum basis. In recognized, year-on-year gets taxed with employer's contribution only when it exceeds 12% of the employee's salary, and interest only if it exceeds 9.5%. But it is taxable year on year. Unrecognized provident fund is not taxed year on year. It is taxed on a lump sum. This is again, their MCQ is asking the taxability procedure. Year on year happens only for recognized and only when the amount given by the employer is exceeding 12% or interest is exceeding 9.5%. Unrecognized, there is no year on year. It is on lump sum. Lump sum when you get at the time of your either retirement or separating your relationship with the employee, that point of time, the employer's contribution and interest thereon becomes taxable, but only lump sum at the time of severing the relationship with the employee. Now, okay, before coming into this, before I close in salary, one or two things which is important for your tax perspective. I already mentioned about relief under what do you call Section 89. Now, what do you mean by this relief? Relief, the word itself gives you an implication that there is something where you're going to be relieved from something. Relief comes because in 1 year, income of other years come together. And by virtue of that, your income becomes higher and you're forced to pay a higher tax. So that's why I said arrears or advance. Maybe 5 years arrears I'm getting together, and suddenly that year's income, 5 years income I'm getting in one previous year, that year income goes high. So I can claim relief under Section 89. So also 1 year I'm taking the advance for the coming year. Then also that year's income goes high, so I can claim relief. What do you mean by relief? I compute my liability without the arrears and I compute it with the arrears and I take the difference. So when I'm computing it without the arrears, I have one tax liability. With the arrears, I have another tax liability. And also compute the liability if this arrear would have gone to the respective years to which it relates. And then I reallocate and I find relief. So at least understand this much, that Section 89 gives you a provision for adjusting or at least partly making some relief when in 1 year's income, other year's income gets merged because of arrears of salary. Again, tax planning under section, your salary, basically, important section for that is 80C, which says that you contribute to your provident fund, you contribute life insurance, you contribute to post office cumulative time deposits. So basically, investment goes to the common form for the economy. So that is why you have 80C. Up to 1.5 lakh you can have under 80C plus a 50,000 for the national pension scheme. So this gives you a provision to save up to rupees 2 lakhs and thereby reduce this. So this can come to individuals who are using their income and making savings under Section 80C. So that's all. That's the basic structure that we have to look into when we are talking about salary income. Now I'm quickly going into house property income. What is more important there is computation of the annual value and the deductions. Again, gross and the deductions. Now, when you compute the gross, first important point that you need to keep in mind is what is house property income? House property income, there we saw in salary, it is coming from employer-employee relationship. And it should be the income which comes out of that relationship and should not be from profession and so on. Here the conditions are these. Number one, income should be from building or land appurtenant thereto. So it should come from, because income from house prop, although we are calling it house property, it's not necessary that it should be only from house property. It can be from any building. So income from building, or it could be income from land appurtenant to building. So land appurtenant to building means land which is attached to building. You can get income from land which is not attached to building also. So this is again once asked for your examination, I'm giving you that. Suppose there is a building in maybe 25 acres of land. Okay, there is a building which is situated in 25 acres of land. Now this building may be somewhere inside this 25 acres of land, but you will not say the entire 25 acres is attached to the building. What do you mean by land appurtenant to building? That much area which is necessary for functioning of the operations of that building. Land which is necessary for the functioning of that building, operations in that building. So there could be some building in which maybe 40 acres are necessary, and there could be some building in which maybe only 5 cents are necessary for the operations to take place. Suppose it's a multi-storied building, say 50-storied building. A lot of companies are there. So it might have a car parking necessary for maybe 10 acres, 25 acres. So land requirement is very large. But suppose it's a small house, you might require maybe one car space for parking 1 or 2 vehicles and maybe a small garden or things like that. So the land appurtenant will be very small. And the other land which is there beyond that will be treated as separate land. So when you are saying land appurtenant to building, it is the land which is attached to the building and which is necessary for performing the functions in that particular building, whether it's house property or whatever be that building. So the income must come from building or the land which is attached to that building. Number two, the SSC must be the owner of that particular building in the previous year. The SSC must be the owner of that building in the previous year. Again, remember, you can get rent from a building without becoming the owner of that building. Then maybe that income that you get will come under income from other source or some other head. It need not come under house. Come from house property. Essential condition under salary. If it has to come under salary income, we saw the essential condition is employer-employee relationship between the person giving the income and the person receiving the income. Just like that, here in house property, essential condition is that the SSC must be the owner. Building on rent. This building has got, I take a building which has got say for 25,000 rupees per month. I take a building on rent and I pay 25,000 rupees as rent. Now I'm not the owner of this building. What I'm doing is I am giving 2 rooms, subletting 2 rooms to somebody else at 10,000 rupees. Now I am saying I'm getting rent of rupees 10,000 rupees. But I'm not getting this 10,000 rupees in my capacity as an owner. I'm getting this in my capacity as a lessee. So I'm getting income here, but I'm not getting income from house property. Because I'm not the owner of that property. Only the rent which is received by the owner will become income from house property. So SSC must be the owner. And the property should not be used for business or profession. Suppose I'm doing my own business in that. And I'm a partner in a partnership firm and I'm using that room for my partnership firm, or I'm using it for some other business. Then I'm saying that there is some rent in that. That will not come over here. So income from building or land appurtenant thereto, SSC must be the owner. Property should not be used for business or profession. These 3 conditions, when it comes, you have income from house property. Now remember here, there are some property which is exempted from this. So it is a property. These conditions might be there and some rent might be there, but it might not come under the income from house property. Now these are some of the exemptions. I've just given some examples, common examples which come for MCQs. One is self-occupied residential property. That means if I have one self-occupied residential property, I need not value that, because we saw earlier, income need not come if you get rent alone. Income can come if you own. income can come if you own, even though you do not get it. Income is not always necessarily, income is on the due basis. It's not necessary that it should be received, or it's not necessary that it should be in a, it should directly even accrue. It can just come in the form of due basis. So suppose I have got 3 houses. One example, some examples which are important for an analytical purposes. I have 3 houses, 4 houses, or 2 houses. I'm not giving any of these houses on rent. I have 3 houses, A, B, C, or 3 property, A, B, C. I'm not letting out any property. Now, even though I'm not letting out property, none of these properties, there is an income which is due from the property. There is something which I could have received had I let out this property, and that is taxable. So that's why you're saying only exemption to that is one self-occupied residential property I can treat as exempted. So if I have 3, A, B, C, at my choice, I can say one I am treating as self-occupied. Whether you occupy it or not, you can treat one as self-occupied. The others will be valued and it will have a due rent. Even though you are not receiving any rent, it will have a due rent and that will become taxable. Clear? So that's why we are saying self-occupied residential property. Otherwise, you will be meaning that self-occupied residential property, will it have any rent? It might not have rent, but there's a due rent. So due rent will come from all the buildings that you own, but one building you can claim as exemption. So property exempt, one self-occupied residential property, or in other words, you can say one self-occupied residential property, only one self-occupied residential property. Farmhouses are exempted because income that you rent, that you get from farmhouses, will be treated as exempted from house property. Again, one palace of an ex-ruler, a ruler, that means a king or a queen who had ruled a particular place, might have palaces, and they might have several palaces. Even for that first one, self-occupied, it's only one self-occupied property. I forgot that one. We have written self-occupied. It's only one self-occupied property. Similarly, one palace of an ex. Suppose you have 3 palaces or 4 palaces or 2 palaces or 8 palaces. One you can treat as exempted. Others will be valued and you will be taxable on that. So farmhouses, there's no one. Any number of farmhouses, if you have rent, you can claim it as exempted. Similarly, the 4th category, which I've shown here, the property of educational institutions, it's not an exhaustive list. Common examples I've given: educational institutions, research institutions, government buildings, local authority buildings, political party buildings, trade union buildings. These are all exempted. So the rent which comes from government, educational institutions, hospitals, trade unions are all exempted. Own business property also will not be coming under this category. So these are some certain things which are actually exempted from this. And what is taxable? The first important point, what is taxable is the reasonable rent, or what we call the expected rent. The reasonable rent is what I've given as MV is municipal value or fair rent, whichever is higher, subject to the standard rent. So MV stands for municipal value, FR stands for fair value, and SR stands for standard rent. So what are we actually doing? First, what we are looking into, we are looking into the municipal value and the fair value. What is municipal value? The value which is fixed by the local authority for the purpose of building tax. You look at any building in any corporation or municipality or panchayat. If the building is situated in a corporation, let us say Thiruvananthapuram Corporation or Cochin Corporation or Calicut Corporation, those are corporation limits. Now even Kollam and Thrissur are corporations. So in those corporations, if you have a building, there is a building tax which is fixed. And that building tax is fixed on the basis of a valuation which the corporation will do. Same thing if it is in a municipality, the municipality will do, or a panchayat will do. So they have fixed a value and they are imposing tax, property tax based on that. That value is called municipal valuation. Fair rent is the rent which fair means what we call nyayam. So the amount which that building will fetch based on the locality, based on what is fetched in similar houses, what you can get. That is fair rent. So you take the two, whichever is higher. That is reasonable rent. But this will be subject to the standard rent. Standard rent is in certain metros, there is a Rent Control Act. And the Rent Control Act says this is the maximum rent that can be fixed for a building. That is called standard rent. So you will take whichever is higher, but that higher cannot exceed the standard rent. So municipal value or fair rent, whichever is higher, subject to the standard rent. So this will be the reasonable rent. First value. Second value is the rent received or receivable after adjusting unrealized rent. So first value has got nothing to do with the letting out. It may be let out or may not be let out. So there, even if it is not let out, there will be municipal value, there will be fair value, or whichever is higher can be taken. Second is rent received or receivable. Rent received means I can receive a lower rent when a higher rent is receivable. And from that amount, I'll adjust my unrealized rent. Unrealized rent means I gave it for rent for some amount. Maybe I gave it for rent at 25,000 rupees per month. My tenant did not give me 1 month's rent. So that's called unrealized rent. But this unrealized rent can be claimed only when certain conditions are fulfilled. That means I must take reasonable steps to get the rent. I must give legal notice. So when those conditions are fulfilled, then I can claim it as unrealized rent. So that can be adjusted. So rent received or receivable. Then take higher of 1 and 2. So reasonable rent and a rent received or receivable. From that, I take whichever is higher. And I adjust, make some, if there is some period for which it is vacant, I adjust the vacancy. Now I have the gross annual value. And from this, I deduct the municipal taxes. MT stands for municipal taxes. Municipal taxes deductible is on payment basis. It is not on the due basis. So if I don't pay in 1 year, I cannot deduct anything. If I pay for 5 years together, I can make the total amount deduction over there. So that is the less municipal taxes. So the key point that you have to understand for gross annual value, as far as your examination is concerned, is that gross value is considering reasonable rent and rent receivable, whichever is higher. Rent received or receivable, whichever is higher. And reasonable rent considers municipal value and fair value, whichever is higher. So in fact, gross annual value encompasses municipal value, fair value, and the actual rent received or receivable. So this is the concept of gross annual value, and which again implies that it is not necessary that the building or the property should be rented, because even if it is not rented, all these values will be there. Just see in 1, even if it is not rented, MV and FR will be there. 2, even if it is not rented, receivable will be there. And then you have your gross annual value. From the gross annual value, we will make a deduction of the municipal taxes, and then you get the net annual value. From the net annual value, deduction under section 24, again, the list is exhaustive. You have only 2 deductions. And the 2 deductions are standard deduction, which is 30% of the gross annual value, and the interest that is borrowed, interest on borrowed capital, which is for the house property. Again, when you're saying interest that is borrowed for house property, there are a couple of things which you should understand over here, that interest is on the due basis. It's not necessary that I should pay interest. Suppose I have taken 10 lakh rupees for either construction or purchase of house property or renewal of house property or repairs to house property. Only thing is it should be a property loan, house property loan. It can be for construction, it can be for acquisition, it can be for repairs, it can be for renewal. That it should be under the title house property. Because house property loan means that the property is pledged and you take it for the purpose of, if the property is pledged, it need not be house property loan. It must be for either construction, purchase, renewal of that property. It must be associated with the property. So that you take a loan. And on that loan, say, suppose you have taken 10 lakh loan, interest part of it, the principal amount will not come over here. Interest part of it, there must be some interest which becomes due in the previous year. It's not necessary that you should pay that interest. Suppose interest is due 1 year because of financial problem, I don't pay that interest. Interest is paid second year, I don't pay that interest. But each year, what is due, I can deduct. What is due, I can deduct. And it is a deduction. It is not an exemption, which we again saw. Deduction means it can go beyond the income. Exemption is subject to the income. Now, earlier in salary, we saw standard deduction. 50,000, I said standard deduction. But if your salary is less than 50,000, you cannot deduct 50,000. If your salary is only 40,000, the maximum that you can deduct is 40,000. So your exemptions that you're claiming over there from a certain amount cannot go beyond the standard deduction is a deduction, but there is a rule in that the deduction cannot go beyond the income. But here, the deduction is such that it can go beyond the income. So that means the exemptions, all the exemptions that you claim cannot go beyond the income. Standard deduction, though it is a deduction, it cannot go beyond the salary. But here, interest on borrowed capital can go beyond the income from house property. Suppose I have an income from house property maybe of 2 lakh and interest on the loan is 3 lakh. I can claim 2 lakh minus 3 lakh and I'll have minus 1 lakh, which means loss from house property. In what we saw in the salary income, you have standard deduction, but because it's only confined to the salary income, you cannot have a negative figure over there. But here you can have a negative figure. So standard deduction is 30% of your net annual value, and interest on borrowed capital you can claim as deduction, and then now you have your income from house property. So this is the basics of income from house property that you can actually claim over here. Now, interest on house property, one more point that is important here is, already I talked about the due basis. When you're claiming interest as deduction, you can also claim interest on fresh loan which you have taken. Interest on fresh loan that you have taken. But suppose you have defaulted and you're taking a penalty for the default of payment, that cannot be deducted. So this is also you can claim your interest on the pre-construction period, because once the house is completed, from that day you're paying the interest. But suppose you take the loan from the date when the land was purchased, there is a gap between the purchase of the land and the finishing of the house. I take a loan in 2017 for buying land, and I'm paying interest from 2017. But 2017, the house is not there. House is completed only in 2020. In 2020, what happens is I take the home, complete the home, and I'm claiming interest from 2020. But the interest which I did not claim from 17, 18, 18, 19, I can also claim as pre-construction interest on house property. So this is basically some part which is important as far as house property income is concerned. Now, I think the other two heads, because I think it's already 12:30, other two heads plus assessment part we can take up, I think, in one separate class. I'll just talk a bit about, because in your part of this, we have a separate head on tax planning under these two heads. So what are the things that you can probably do in terms of tax planning? So there are two things which are important under tax planning under these two heads. Number one, in salary, tax planning measures, options which can perhaps be given and looked into is if you are getting an amount in the terms of allowance rather than perquisite, you will see a higher taxability. Similarly, if you are not investing, you will have a higher taxability. So two ways in which you can perhaps reduce your tax liability is, one, have a preference for perquisites and have a perquisites given by the employer through the employer's facility. That will reduce tax liability. And the second one is try to reinvest amounts. And this reinvesting part is available in all heads. So these are the two ways in which, like if you reinvest in insurance or in provident fund or in post office cumulative time deposit, you will see that your the taxable, you get a deduction under section 80C, so your liability can come down. So these are some measures which are important there. Now, the important measure which comes under this part, that is your house property, is try to create property through borrowed capital. Because if you have borrowed capital, there is interest on housing loan on the borrowed capital, which you can claim as deduction. Other part cannot come. Now, when we discuss this capital gains, you will see the same thing coming over there. Capital gains become taxable, but if under section 54, if the capital gains are reinvested, then on the reinvested part, we will not have much of a tax implication, because the reinvested part we can claim as deduction under Section 54. So the tax planning measures are basically employers choosing to give more perquisites in kind rather than cash benefits, number one, and trying to give more incentivized investment, putting it in provident fund and things where you can reduce tax liability. And as far as house property is basically looking at the interest part of it. So I conclude with this. I think the remaining two heads plus assessment part for focusing on individuals, we'll have to have maybe one session or two sessions more, I don't know, based on availability of time. So you look into your what you call supportive readings that are associated with this, and perhaps if you have something to share, you can look at that and look at certain things which are important in terms of what you call implications. I was mentioning that all throughout the class in terms of when we say, because normally this computation of gross annual value, fair value for house property or in valuation of allowances are things which we know, but we have to actually see how they have their implications in terms of questions which comes in terms. Nobody will ask you what is standard deduction or what is professional tax. They might give you questions on somebody is getting this much of expense and this much of salary, so can he claim the entire amount of standard deduction? So questions will be in that analytical form. So try to find out answers to that in those forms. Nobody will ask you what is the amount of. I'm just giving you certain preparation tips again all throughout. Nobody's going to ask you. I don't think there will be a question on how much education allowance is taxable or how much education allowance or hostel allowance is exempted. But it will come likely. It is likely to be in the form of examples, which will say, which will give you that this much instead of 2 children, they might give 3 children, or they might give 1 child. They might enhance the amount or lessen the amount and ask for the exemption. So you have to be prepared on that, on those perspectives. So thank you so much, and I think we'll dedicate one day for question answers or things like that on that count, because that will help you more, because this is only a small part and it is already 12:30 plus. So again, wish you all the very best, and over to you. So Arsha, you can take over. So shall we? Yeah.
Sir, I invite Ananya for proposing the vote of thanks.
Most respected Dr. Gabriel Simon Tuttle and all the participants present here. Good afternoon all. I am Ananya, MPhil scholar. Once Albert Einstein said, the hardest thing in the world to understand is the income tax. So today we had another beautiful session on income tax and corporate tax planning by Simon Sir. On behalf of Commerce Club, Department of Commerce, University of Kerala, and its entire fraternity, I feel immense pleasure to take this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks. First of all, I would like to convey my sincere gratitude to our eminent person, Dr. Gabriel Simon Tuttle, Professor and Head, Dean Faculty of Commerce, University of Kerala, who spared his busiest time gracing the occasion. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next, my deep sense of appreciation and thanks to all the participants who chose to be live with us and attend the session and made it as a successful one. Thank you all. A slight reminder, today we'll be having our next session at 5 p.m. regarding higher education system by Sri Krishnan P. Thank you all and have a very nice day.
Thank you.